Amen. You may be seated, friends. Well, my name's John. I'm one of the pastors here at Stillwater, and we are so excited to get to be here again with you this weekend and worshiping Jesus. And we're continuing our message series where we're going through the book of Esther verse by verse, learning a whole lot about God and how God takes care of his people. And Esther is such an interesting book. And I think you'll find this morning's story especially interesting. You might remember how the story's gone. We've got Esther, who is an orphan, who is a foreigner. Her people have been taken out of the land of Israel where they're from, and many years back they've been hauled away into exile in Persia because they had sinned. They had disobeyed God. Esther is raised by her cousin Mordecai, and through some very crazy circumstances, Esther ends up becoming the queen there in Persia. And Mordecai has a conflict with a guy named Haman. Remember, Mordecai is a Jew. Haman is an Amalekite. Jews and Amalekites do not like each other at all. And so Mordecai disrespects Haman the Amalekite. And Haman is a very powerful man. In fact, he's the king's right-hand man. And so consequently, Haman gets a law passed that will cause all the Jews to be destroyed. They'll all be slaughtered there in this one awful day. Well, Mordecai is upset about this, and he goes to Esther and said, Esther, you got to do something. Perhaps you were elevated to the throne for such a time as this. You've got to act. And so Esther boldly goes before the king, and it could have cost her life. She didn't have the right just to walk in there, but she goes before the king, and the king receives her favorably. And remember that instead of asking for the salvation of her people that day, instead she invites Haman and the king to like a little dinner party she's having, just the three of them. And so they go and they have dinner, and then at the end of the dinner, king says, what do you want, Esther? What are we here for? And she says, I want you to come to another dinner party, right? Come back tomorrow. Let's do this all again, and then I'll ask you. So they're going to come back the next day, but Haman leaves that night, and as he's on his way out, he's excited. Remember, he's skipping, I'm pretty sure. He's really pumped about this, and he sees Mordecai. And Mordecai, not only does he not bow down to him, he doesn't even stand up. Just doesn't have any respect for this Haman guy. And so Haman is furious. He goes home, and he brings in all his friends and his family, and he tells them just how great he is and how awesome that Haman himself is. But life stinks because one guy disrespects him, remember? And so his wife gives him this advice. And it's actually part of kind of the comedy of this story. Remember early in the book that the king made a law that all wives must obey their husbands all the time, right? But what you're seeing is that behind the strings, the wives are really the ones, or behind the scenes, the wives are really the ones kind of pulling the strings here. They know what's going on. The guys are not overly competent here. And so his wife says to him, here's the plan. Tomorrow, or today, you can go ahead and set up this 75-foot tall pole, okay? Kind of like a giant pencil, right? Like pointed on the top, because this was a form of execution in Persia. So set up this 75-foot high pole. Tomorrow, you go to the king, and you get yourself permission to impale Mordecai on this, to kill him on this pole, so everybody will see what happens when they do this. Haman likes the plan. In fact, he likes the plan so well, he decides to kind of improvise a little bit, to do a little bit of put his spin on it. Now, do you see a potential problem, ladies? Yeah, you know what happens here, right? So Haman goes to the king that night instead of waiting till the next day. And what we're going to see is that Haman runs into a variety of coincidences. Now, we put those in air quotes because I don't think they're coincidental at all. Haman is going to run smack into the providence of God, caring for God's people, taking care of the Israelites, even though Mordecai has foolishly put them in this bad position. So it's one of those times where there seems to be a coincidence, but we know that God is at work. I like the way that Albert Einstein said it when he was talking about coincidence. He said, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. I like that. Have you seen that in your life before? Something that just seemed to be coincidental, and you look back and you say, yeah, there was God in that. We had one in my family just yesterday. We were school shopping, and we were in a store with a very long line. You know how that goes, right? The line's like 4 times around the store or something, it seems like. And so I was helping the boys finish up, and Jennifer was ready with Marissa, and so sent her to get in line. She's standing there in line, and I came to meet her, and when I couldn't find her in line, when I found her, she was standing kind of like out beside the line, back in some clothes racks, and she's standing there with a kind of a strange look on her face. She's holding the clothes, and she's covered in vomit. Like, this is not what I sent you here to do, right? What's happening, right? And Marissa says, Mom just saved a baby. And there was this 1-year-old that was choking, and thankfully my wife has training in this stuff, and she had the chance to be able to give her CPR, or not CPR, to Heimlich. Yeah, thank you for about a minute. Thank God, right? Thank God for coincidences that are not really coincidences. Okay, I'll stop bragging on Jennifer now. I just had to take that moment. But seriously, God does this, and we're going to see it through this story. So last chapter, Haman's out. He's angry. He goes home. And so he's going to come back now to the king. He's going to do it his own way. He's going to come to the king at night. Funny thing is, first coincidence is the king is already in bed, but he can't sleep. He can't sleep. And apparently what ancient kings would do, instead of counting sheep, they would have somebody read to them like their historical stuff about their reign. So that's where we pick up the story this morning. And so we'll turn to our ever-trusty VeggieTales to help us understand, okay? Let's check this out.
9:32. King cuts himself shaving.
Ouch. I remember that one. How about something more recent? You got anything more recent? Thanks for doing this. You know, it really does help me sleep.
1:40. King is joined by Haman in the throne room.
I really like it when you read me these records. I guess you could say it's the story of me.
1:45. Haman leaves to get queen. 1:47. Chef arrives with wedding cake. 1:50. King stands up to eat cake.
Ooh, this is a good one. Excitement. Drama.
1:51. The king's life is saved by the guard Mordecai. 1:52.
Wait. Did you say Mordecai saved my life? He's that little grape with the mustache, right?
Yep.
Mordecai, huh? Did we ever do anything to thank him for that?
Nope.
That's a shame. Maybe I ought to give him a card or something. You know, to show my appreciation. I wish I were more creative with things like that. Come in.
King, I have a most urgent request. I'm wondering if you can...
Whoa, wait a minute there, Haman. Let me ask you something. I need a little creative advice.
Okay. What is it?
Okay, there's this really great guy that I really want to thank. You know, show him my appreciation for something he did. You got any ideas?
Oh, well, King, I'm flattered.
I was thinking of a card or something.
Oh, no. Cards are nice, but this sounds like a very special guy.
Uh-huh.
It sounds like the kind of guy who deserves a parade.
A parade?
Yeah, I think this guy should be dressed in royal robes and be marched through the whole city on your horse. And maybe you should even let him wear one of your crowns.
I guess he is pretty special.
And one of your most noble princes should lead this man through the streets, proclaiming, "This is a really neat guy. The king really likes him. He's brave and has rugged good looks."
You see, Haman, you're the creative one around here. What would I do without you?
Oh, well, thank you, Your Highness.
All those things you mentioned, every last one, do that for the good God Mordecai, the man who saved my life. And you be the one to go with him on that parade, okay? I knew I could count on you. Lucky thing you dropped by. Now, what was it you wanted? You know, maybe you should just ask me tomorrow. I'm getting kind of sleepy. Good night.
There we have it. It kind of stinks to be Haman sometimes, doesn't it? You know, he thinks he's got life all together, right? But we see a number of coincidences of the king is sleeping, he can't sleep, and instead of counting sheep, he's hearing the records. Second coincidence, earlier in the story, Mordecai heard of this assassination plot. He had heard that something bad was going to happen to the king. We'll pick up the text here in verse 1 of chapter 6. That night, the king had trouble sleeping, so he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so it could be read to him. In those records, he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. All right, so we'd had two of the closer guards, the very trusted guards. They had this plot to assassinate the king way back in chapter 2. Mordecai hears about it. He tells Esther about it. Esther tells the king, so the plot is foiled. King Xerxes' life is saved, and she credits Mordecai, but interestingly, nothing is done for him. That's the third coincidence. Nothing happens for that. Verse 3, what reward or recognition did we give to Mordecai for this? The king asked. His attendants replied, nothing has been done for him. Now this was a big, big oversight. Herodotus, the great historian, tells us that there had been an assassination plot for not Xerxes, but for Xerxes' brother. And another guy had uncovered this plot and saved Xerxes' brother's life. And so Xerxes actually had that guy elevated to be the governor. Okay, so he put him in a very big position, and that was for saving his brother's life. So if we can make somebody governor for saving the brother's life, we could think that we could have at least splurged for a thank you note and a gift card to his favorite chain restaurant or hardware store, right? But no, we didn't do anything for Mordecai. So coincidentally here, the king finds out this evening that we missed the opportunity to honor Mordecai. So verse 4, who's that in the outer court? The king inquired. As it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole that he had prepared. So the attendant replied to the king, Haman is out in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. So Haman comes in. He's thinking, this is a slam dunk, right? I got the king to sign off on the genocide of all of Mordecai's people. And so tonight, I'm just asking for permission to impale Mordecai, that terrible, awful man. And so Haman comes in thinking this is going to be an easy one, but not so much. This coincidence, if you will, that Haman walks in right as Xerxes is making a decision on how to honor Mordecai. Verse 6, Haman came in. The king said, what should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? Haman thought to himself, who would the king wish to honor more than me? Obviously, right? I'm the best guy in the kingdom. I mean, who else? I mean, all those other peons out there, right? Who would the king ever consider honoring other than the great Haman? So Haman sees this as an opportunity to describe what he would like to have done for himself. The pride is absurd, really. Haman is a very honored man already. He's already the king's right-hand man. He's already got people, minus Mordecai, bowing down when he walks by. He's already very wealthy, for he had bribed the king to get this law passed. He's got a lot of stuff going for him, and yet it's not enough. When given the opportunity to exalt himself even further, he will take it. Why? Because this is how pride works. Pride is something that brings us no real fulfillment in the long term. We try to honor ourselves, to elevate ourselves, to show everybody how great we are. But the thing is, we get ourselves to this certain level of greatness, and we've just got to keep getting it more and more and more. And it's a pursuit that you never end. When it's all about you, there's no end to that, because it could always be a little more about you. a little better, a little bigger, something else. And Haman shows us just how shallow and how hollow life is when it is driven by pride, when it is driven by trying to serve ourselves instead of trying to serve God and to serve other people. Haman replied, verse 7, if the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the king himself has ridden, with a royal emblem on his head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let him see that the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes and led throughout the city square on the king's horse. Have the official shout as they go, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." Okay? So we're going to dress this guy up in the king's clothes, right? We're going to make him look like the king. We're going to put him on one of the king's horses. And we're going to have one of the king's most noble officials. By the way, King, if you don't have any idea, Mordecai, he'd be great for that job, by the way. But one of the noble officials will lead this guy around. And as the parade is happening, the one-man parade, right? We don't need any floats or anything because it's all about one guy, right? As this one guy goes by, this servant, perhaps Mordecai, will shout out and will say, "This is what is done for the man that the king wants to honor." It's an amazing thing. I mean, in our context, it's kind of like saying you get to ride in the presidential motorcade, right? And you get to stand there in the podium in the Rose Garden, right? All this kind of like presidential type stuff. And we say, this is what happens to a guy that the president wants to honor. It's a big, big deal. Haman thinks of the best possible human honor that he could possibly give to himself. Verse 10, "Excellence," the king said to Haman, "quick, take the robes and my horse, and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace." Leave out nothing you have suggested. Imagine Haman's face on this one, right? I mean, don't kid yourself. The Bible is full of comedy. I have to think that as this story was unfolding, that you've got God up there in heaven, and he's like elbowing the angel Gabriel, like, you got to check this out. Haman, he thinks this parade is for him. Well, look, check out the look on his face right now. Wow. Are you kidding me? Mordecai? The king wants to honor Mordecai? Why on earth would we do that? Mordecai is terrible. Everybody knows that. He saved the king's life? Oh, that would have been information useful to me before I decided not to just give him a thank you card, right? So Haman, his plan is foiled. Imagine how humiliating this must have been for Haman. I mean, if he gets mad when he walks by walks by Mordecai just one-on-one, right? He's walking home out the palace gate, nobody else is there, and Mordecai doesn't stand up for him. If that makes him mad, imagine this scenario, right? Because we take Mordecai, we get the royal robes on him, we put him on the king's horse. He looks something like this right here, right? So Mordecai is all ready to go, and here, poor Haman over here has to be cheerleader extraordinaire, right? This is what happens to the man the king wishes to honor. What was that, Haman? This is what happens to the man the king wishes to honor. Why did I ever think of this horrible, horrible plan? Somebody should have stopped me, right? Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. How many times have we lived that one out? Don't kid yourself and say you haven't. We all have. We all do. Maybe we aren't as extreme as Haman. We don't have the resources and the position Haman had, but don't kid yourself. Like we said last week, there's a little bit of Haman running around in every single one of us. Maybe a lot of Haman. There's this desire for others to see us greater than we are, to honor us, to respect us. Maybe we've had certain levels of success in our life, and we've worked really hard, and we've studied really hard, or we've prepared really hard, and we feel that we deserve it. Because look at all I've accomplished. Look at all that I've done. My peers did so much less. I've done such amazing thing. Everybody should respect. I mean, yes, I know that God had something to do with this, but I've done a pretty good job. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. It's so easy to let this mentality slowly sneak into our lives. Little by little, it seeps into our lives. It sneaks into our lives. Verse 12, afterward, Mordecai returned to his job at the palace gate, but Haman hurried home, dejected and completely humiliated. Verse 13, when Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends what had happened, his wise advisors and his wife said, now get this, remember yesterday, Haman has a great day. He leaves, he sees Mordecai, his day is wrecked. He goes home to some good home cooking, and everybody tells him, hey, it's great, set up a poll, murder Mordecai, and life will be fine, right? So today, great day, well, actually not too great for long, then awful, ruined by Haman here, right? So he decides to go home, and what do they tell him this time? A little different. Since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him. Now, what in the world is this all about? Yesterday, when I told you about Haman, you said, oh, kill him, it'll be fine, right? And today you say, well, since he is a Jew, you can't really do anything. In fact, if you oppose him, probably you're going to die. It's going to be fatal. And it's a challenge, right? And some interpreters have said it's the author of Esther here who's kind of writing in his like political bias, right? You know, and kind of predicting what may happen here if Haman continues down this course. Others believe that Haman's wife is speaking prophetically, that God is speaking through her, seeing what's going to happen here. But regardless of which one that is, what we see very clearly is that God is taking care of his people. God is taking care of his people. Mordecai has gotten them into an awful mess thanks to his pride. Haman wants to kill them thanks to his pride. And despite these two gigantic egos in the room, God is going to work. God is going to save his people. He's going to prevent this awful tragedy. Proverbs 16:5, the Lord detests the proud, they will surely be punished. Pride, it doesn't work out for us, friends. It may seem good, it may seem right for a season. Maybe things are going really poorly for you right now. And you say, yep, I've hit that rock bottom place, I get it, I'm humbled, I give myself to you, Jesus, because it's all in pieces right now. Would you please take it? Put it back together. He'll do that. That place of brokenness is a powerful place to begin. Maybe you're at a different place. Maybe you hear the brokenness talk and you say, that's not where I'm at all. Things are going quite well. I'm succeeding. I'm doing what I set out to do. And you're facing that temptation that comes whether you're down here or whether you're up here. The temptation to be proud and arrogant is still just as real. It doesn't matter where you find yourself on that spectrum. The temptation towards pride is always there. And we like to make pride one of those second-tier sins, right? Not a big deal kind of things. We like to sweep them under the rug. You got pride, you got gluttony, you got little white lies, you got gossip, you got saying mean things to your family you probably shouldn't say. Those are, let everybody does it, right? It's not that big of a deal. We forget, pride is the sin that got Satan thrown out of heaven. Pride was behind Adam and Eve in the garden when they took the fruit, right? Remember Satan's temptation to them, you eat this thing, you'll be like God. We weren't happy enough just being where we're at. We want to be God. And this is where pride comes in. And we may not say it that overtly, but it so easily sneaks into every single one of us. I want my life to be my way, and God, if I've got time for your way, I'll work on that later. I want to manage my finances the way I want to. And I know you call me to tithe, but we'll see about that, God, because I'm doing it my way. Or I know that you call me to be loving and kind to my enemies, but my enemies, they're real jerks. Who's got time for that, right? We'll see how that works out. But for now, I'm going to handle my enemies my way. I'm going to handle them my way. Whatever it is for you, pride easily slips into our lives, whether things are going good or things are really struggling. The good news for you and for me, though, is that we've got time to work on this. Sometime, because you're taking breaths right now. So that implies you've still got some time left. Maybe today, maybe a lot longer, but you've got time. Remember the story Jesus told of a guy whose time ran out. He was a successful guy, and there was nothing wrong with his success. He was a farmer who had succeeded in a bumper crop, right? And he has this bumper crop, and he says, I'll build bigger barns, and I'll say to myself, eat, drink, be merry, right? So enjoy what you've set aside for yourself. And it's not the success that was the problem. It was the way that he handled the success, and the way there was no place for God in his plans. The way his plans were all about him. And Jesus says, fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. If we're living in a position of pride, friends, it's not the place we want to stay. Because I don't know how long I have left. I tend to think it's a long time, but at some point I know that it is appointed to people once to die and then to face God to be judged. It happens. Every single one of us, that is in the future for us. So what if we lived differently? What if we said, God, would you take my pride, take my arrogance, take these things from me. Help me to give myself more fully to you. C.S. Lewis said it this way: for pride is a spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. We have a number of cancer survivors or folks who are even battling this right now in our congregation. It's a horrible, horrible disease. Many of you know it firsthand. Lewis compares pride to a spiritual cancer, and I think it's a good comparison. Cancer often starts out small, subtle. We don't even know that it's there. In fact, they say there's cancer cells inside of everybody, right? But they normally are under control. You can tell I'm not a medical doctor, but it comes when these things come together and start to form a bigger problem. And we know that one of the best things we can do with cancer is early detection. Get it while it's small. Pride is also like that. If you think your issue with pride is small, thank God it's time to get after it. Don't wait until this cancer gets worse and worse. And if maybe you're looking at it and saying, well, I missed the early treatment scenario, well, thank God that the great physician is here, that he heals, and that he makes us whole, and that he can remove that cancer by his grace, by giving ourselves to him, by continually growing in that grace. I remember when I was in college, I was 19 years old, in a pastoral ministries class. And I remember my professor, Dr. Dave Bieberstein, he said, we were talking about a well-known pastor who had fallen, who had sinned and lost his position and all these things. And I remember as we were having that discussion at 19 thinking, thank God I'll never do that kind of thing. And my professor said, the ones in here who are at the most risk are those who are saying, thank God I'll never do that kind of thing. He said, every single one of you could be that person. And it's not just true for pastors. All of us are tempted to sin, tempted to do things our own way, in arrogance, to say, God, I want to just do it my way. I know your ways, but with my actions, I'm saying I'm going to do it my way. My professor said that when you see someone in that position, your only response should be, there, but by the grace of God, go I. The only difference between you and that person is whether or not you are living into God's saving and sanctifying grace to help you to be holy as God is calling you to be holy. How are you doing on that journey, friends? Would you pray with me? God, we give ourselves to you. We give our pride to you. Whether it seems to us to be a huge issue or a not as huge issue in our lives, we all wrestle with this. And I pray, God, that you would help us to put you first, not ourselves and our own gratification in life, Lord, but you. Lord, help us to understand that every good and perfect gift comes from you, Jesus. Lord, I thank you for the many blessings you've given us, and I pray that you would help us to know your saving grace more and more. Jesus, thank you for setting the ultimate example for us when you gave yourself for us. You came down from heaven. You emptied yourself of all but love and died so that we could be saved, so that we could be freed from the bondage of sin and death. Lord, help us to understand that grace, to experience that grace as we celebrate this meal of communion together. Lord, we love you and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.